Two ideas have come together, and I wanted to talk about both of them in this recording, because I think it gives an interesting opportunity to discuss a phenomena which I actually think is incredibly important. The environmental activist Greta Thunberg has been in New York recently, and I disagree with a couple of things that she says. My perspective is actually she's way too hopeful. She's way too hopeful with regards to the environmental science, and she's way too hopeful with regards to the political system. I think the environmental science indicates very clearly that there is nothing we can do at this stage to reverse what has occurred, and moreover, we are in a kind of spiral in a direction that we have no meaningful control over. So the whole nature of if we change, then we'll get to a place which will be more like normal, I don't think is applicable anymore. I think the science has moved well beyond that point. And it almost makes me wonder why people even talk about the notion of reconstruction at this stage. Like, why is there a political narrative associated with, well, if we do these things now, then we'll be okay? We're not okay. It won't be okay. We're going into new uncharted territory where we need to have meaningful scientific discourse to actually explain what is occurring, rather than this notion that if we just do these things, we'll be okay. I also think she's incredibly hopeful with regards to the political system, which I think is naive and actually really dangerous to be teaching children at this stage. I think there's no notion that the political system will change. It's a systemic problem. It's the nature of the system. And to say if leaders do certain things, then we might get to the environmental science seems to put a nonsensical weighting on this dead system that we have inherited that should be discussed associated with what comes next, not associated with we can change, like if my guy's in office or my gal is in office, then things will be very different. No, the system is broken. So I'm critical with Greta's comments with regards to those two things. But I think it's incredibly important that we have voices such as hers in the discourse. And I think that is a movement in the right direction. Now, you can look at this, and I'm going to talk about Chanel Miller as well. You can look at this in terms of privileged women coming forward from their place of privilege. Thunberg is obviously a girl, but, these are people that have money, that have influence, and are being allowed to speak because they have these things. But I still think it's important that their narrative is out there. I think we need to have a pluralistic discourse, which we don't have currently. And I think Greta is part of that pluralistic discourse. So even though I think she's way too hopeful on a couple of things, I think it's great that she's there. I have read Chanel Miller's book, Know My Name. Chanel Miller was the person who was assaulted by Brock Turner, which might just be a Bay Area thing. It might just be a US thing. But living in the Bay Area and living in the US, it's a thing that is close to me. And I find her book amazing. The lucidity and the strength of the writing is really amazing. And I think the points that she makes are incredibly important. A point that she doesn't make explicitly, but is referenced throughout the book, and I think one of the main reasons the book should be read by, in particular, young people, is the nature of how there is no restorative justice. So she talks quite candidly about how she had been blackout drunk prior to going to the Stanford party. If you are blackout drunk, if you've experienced this through drinking where you lose track of everything, you need to be really cautious about where you put yourself in with alcohol being consumed. I'm in no way justifying the crime. That's not the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that the justice system, the restorative nature of the justice system, is so far behind that irrespective of the horrendous acts, you are never going to see justice through the contemporary justice system. So you need to enact something which is associated with self-protection. Now, I say this as someone who has been teetotal for many years, nearly 20 years now. But certainly when I started getting to the stage where I was blackout drunk, which happened very infrequently, in fact, really never. But when I got to the stage where I'd injured my head or something like that through drinking, then, the game was up as far as I was concerned. This isn't about that. Chanel Miller's book isn't about that phenomena. Chanel Miller's book is about how the justice system has no way of actually dealing with sexual assault. And it is fascinating and intimate and poignant and so empowering that I think it is an amazing book that will be, I think it will stand the test of time. I've bought it for other folk that I know. I think it's sufficiently impactful to be well worth reading for anyone. Because what it explains very intimately is the fact that the justice system has systemic problems, very similar to my discussion of the political system with Greta Thunberg. The justice system has systemic problems, which it is not going to be able to correct through normative means. That's my assertion. But I think it's pretty clear through reading this book that there are now two justice systems, right? There is the social justice system, and then there is the legal justice system. And the legal justice system basically is about perpetuating injustice based on a variety of factors. And that, I think, is really important to be memorialized, particularly in something that people read and consume. Now, obviously, look, as with Greta, Chanel has a particular view that if the right person was in office, everything would be okay. The lauding associated with Biden in the book is really very curious. And I think it's part of a narrative associated with kind of Bay Area Democrats in terms of they're doing the right thing because they're voting Democrat. Well, it's an interesting narrative. But I think what this provides is a seed to people. Now, whether or not they have the wherewithal to do additional deconstructive thought about this, at least it provides a seed to people that there are problems here that go far beyond the law, the justice system, the means of dealing with these things, that there's actually a level of discourse which hopefully somehow will move back into the judicial system. But it really is a very fascinating book because it describes, there is no continuum with regards to assaults. There is no notion of, nearly being murdered versus being raped versus being sexually assaulted. All these things are all horrendous. And the account in particular of just the amount of debris that was inside her body, for want of a better term, is really harrowing. The notion that this animal, this individual, was so far removed from any burden of care in his acts, really, really chilling. And I think it's an interesting account as well associated with how these people are created, how American society, privileged society in general, creates these individuals that don't care. They have no burden of care. And I think what's particularly interesting about this story is how men in society have reacted based on, very similar to Greta Thunberg. The response of men here is what is really particularly curious. And for these reasons, I think these two individuals are worth noting, worth lauding, worth describing as being ones to watch, but let's not make them the minority. Let's have a discourse here that involves a number of people, a number of dissenting and different voices. And obviously, gender, race, these kind of things are important here as well. Let's get together some kind of diversity, because through all of this, we will have some very interesting and curious discussions associated with systemic change. I wanted to put this idea out in a longer funk recording.